Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I am a learner of wine, and we hope you'll continue learning and sipping along with us. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Season 2 of Wines We Drink. I'm so excited to be back on round 2 of this journey on discovering wine, becoming more comfortable with it for myself as a wine novice. And luckily, I'm joined by someone with far more skills in this department than me. Keith Herndon is back as well. Welcome, Keith.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Keith, we had so much fun on our first season exploring all sorts of wines from around the world. What can our listeners expect from our show in Season 2?
Well, you're right. We're going to have a lot of fun with Season 2, I think. As I said last year when we opened our very first episode of this podcast, we named it Wines We Drink for a reason. We open bottles of wine I love, drink them, and then share with you and our listeners the joy we get from tasting these exceptional wines. Our listeners, really enjoyed the reactions that we got from you last year and how your enthusiasm for the process came through. Your comments were always spot on. So I don't know about that novice comment that you opened the show with today, but we're going to take the same approach in Season 2. I'm going to treat you to some incredibly delicious wines, and we'll talk about them. Through our conversations, I hope our audience will learn about wines and come to appreciate these selections as much as I do.
Wow, well, that sounds fantastic. And yeah, I'm 100% on board for another summer of drinking the wonderful selections you bring to this program. I'm excited to learn about some of the new varietals and to explore some new regions we're introducing this season. I mean, the audience and myself are in for a treat.
Yeah, we took a lot of feedback from the audience that we got in Season 1. We learned that our audience is younger than the wine market overall. And for many of our listeners, their wine journey is just beginning. So we took what we heard from our audience to heart. And when we were making the summer selections for what we call this summer's case of episodes, we really wanted to pick some things that I think represent excellent quality, but exceptional value as well. We're going to be drinking 5 whites, including a sparkling wine. We're going to do a rosé, and then we're going to do 5 reds, I think. So, we'll have some really nice selection across there. And of those, only 2 cost more than $30 a bottle. I've included a couple of indulgences. We're going to be drinking a wonderful California sparkling wine that we'll use to celebrate the midpoint of the season. And then we're going to do an incredible French red that is a top 1% wine in the world that we'll use as our conclusion episode in our last episode of the season.
Yeah, that top 1% wine in the world is probably my favorite phrase that gets said on this podcast. I think that sounds like a great plan. I can't wait to get started next week with our first bottle. But before that, we have a few things to tell our listeners that's new for us since our last episode we posted in mid-August of last year.
Yes, Charlotte, we have a lot of new things to talk about. And the first I'd like to introduce is our location where we're recording today. We're recording our first episode, and we'll be back here for our second and third episodes at the Tapped Wine Bar. It's a wonderful place that recently opened in our college town by our friends Todd and Angela Hurt. It's a combination of wines on tap. They offer 24 selections of wine by the glass. It's also a bottle shop. You taste something you like by the glass, you can buy it by the bottle and then take it home with you.
Yeah, you introduced me to this place a few months ago, and it's become a favorite hangout, I would say. The ambience is low-key, it's chic, but it's not a pretentious place at all, which we know is important for me. It's all about discovering wines that you like and enjoying them among friends. It's really great.
Yeah, you're right about that. I was so excited when Angela and Todd invited us to record some of our episodes here. Their approach is our approach on this podcast. We explore all sorts of wines and we find the ones we enjoy. And then, I like to think that, drinking wine is about finding that happiness in the bottle. No one should drink wines that they don't like just because you think you should like it, right? It's about that journey. It's about finding the flavor that you like, the style of wine that you like, and drinking the wines that you want to enjoy without that pretentiousness around it.
Yeah, that's been the best thing that I've learned through this entire experience. So it's really cool that Todd and Angela share that same mission. And we're excited to have Todd join us later in the episode to talk about his wine journey and his approach to selecting the wines that he and Angela offer here. Todd is a certified specialist of wine, a credential he's earned through the Society of Wine Educators, and I'm really eager to hear from him. Also, speaking of credentials, Keith, you were busy in the month since our first season ended. Listeners, my co-host is now, drum roll, a certified wine sommelier. Congrats to you.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. In the spirit of full transparency, our first season was part of the activities that I needed to earn my credential as a certified wine educator. And then I kept going with some additional training through the Asia Pacific Wine and Spirit Institute. The founder and leader of that training organization, Dr. Clinton Lee, has been a personal inspiration. And I would encourage our listeners to go back and catch the episode that we did with him in the last episode of season 1. He had a lot of great insights about wine and culture, and I'd give him a big shout out, right? But I also want to give a big shout out to you. You've been my partner through this wine journey over the last couple of years, and without you, this podcast wouldn't exist, and you were there for my sommelier training by helping me record several of the training videos. You've been such a supportive friend that all of this is done with you in mind.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Shucks. I've really used these opportunities to expand my own wine horizons in a fun way. So you're the one who had to do with all of the studying, and I was just absorbing all of your awesome knowledge. I mean, in season 1, I really embraced the idea of learning that about wine and the fact that it can be casual and it can be fun. I think that's what we've heard from our listeners too about season 1, is that they sense how much fun we have drinking and talking about wine. And we certainly want to bring that to our listeners again this season with a whole new slate of wines we'll be drinking.
Charlotte, I can't tell you enough about how excited I am over the wines we're featuring this season. The wines we're going to be drinking this year are amazing for all sorts of reasons. Yes, they are all delicious, right? But our lineup also represents some remarkable stories in wine. Some of it is from the histories of the wineries. Some of it is from the journeys of the winemaker. But overall, they represent this new culture in winemaking that respects the land and emphasizes sustainability. And it's this connection between history and the future. Right? We're finding some really great wines to present that are bridging that tradition of great wine, but ensuring that their wineries and ensuring that their varietals that we're going to be drinking, have a future out there.
Yeah, I mean, that point's so important to our listeners. I mean, people care, consumers care about where their wine comes from, where the things that they're consuming comes from. And you mentioned earlier that our audience is younger than the overall wine market. They download our show because they want to learn about wines too. And the younger generation of wine consumers really care about how the wines they drink are made and who's making them. They want to be introduced to the wines that take sustainability seriously.
Yes, I think our podcast and what we really want to do this season is to play an especially key role in helping reduce the mystery around wine for our younger consumers. There was some data that I came across when we were putting together this season from a group called Wine Intelligence, and it put this age issue into some really stark terms. If you go back and look at the data from 2010, 28% of wine drinkers in the U.S. were in the 21 to 34 age group, and 32% were older than 55. Okay, but if you fast forward 10 years later, the most recent data from 2020 was that wine consumers who are 21 to 34 years old had dropped to just 18% of the market, while those 55 and older had grown to 47%, or nearly half of the market, right?
Wow. I mean, that is such a crazy change. I mean, they tell us a lot about where the wine market is going and how the wine market is aging over the course of 10 years. I mean, I agree We want to tell the stories that help explain to younger consumers that wine, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be accessible. And really, it's just about finding the wines you like to drink and enjoying them, right? I mean, so I'm really excited to really dig into that 18% of the market, maybe move the needle a little bit if we're ambitious.
Right.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll come back. We'll be joined by our host for today's episode, Todd Hurt, the proprietor at Tapped. We're going to talk with him, Keith and I, about his wine journey and the decision, along with his wife, Angela, to open a wine bar in our quintessential little college town. Okay, hello again, everyone. We're back from the break. We're joined by Todd Hurt, the proprietor of Tapped. Thanks so much for joining us on Wines We Drink.
Thanks. We're excited to have you in.
So let's get right into it. Down to business. Please explain for our listeners, what's the concept for Tapped?
Angela and I wanted to create a space that you could come in and try wines before you buy them. How many times have you been on your way to someone's house for dinner and wanted to stop and buy a bottle of wine? And you have to rely on either the tasting notes on the shelf or someone behind the counter to help you pick something that you think they may like. In our situation, you could come in and you can try wine. If you like it, you can take that special bottle to your friend's house and go, I tried this, I really liked it, and I wanted to share it with you.
I think that that's so great, especially for someone like me who doesn't have a lot of experience in the tasting department. But so where did you and Angela get the idea?
We saw a really cool place in New Orleans. It's called the Wine Institute of New Orleans, or WINO for short. And they had 128 bottles in their machines, in their dispensers. And it was quite an amazing experience. We felt like kids in a candy store and got to try an Opus One, about $400 bottle for $20, and it was good. And then we tasted a bottle next to it that was $65 that we liked even better. And we thought, well, that's why we want to do this.
Right.
So at this point, you have 24 on tap.
That's right.
Are you going to get to 128 at some point?
Well, we would love to, Keith, but it's going to be a process. But we do hope to have another 8 dispenser on by football season.
That's great. What's been the biggest surprise you've had about selling wines by the glass in this on-tap self-serve model?
We just love to see the experience of the customer when they come in and they taste something, and we're able to lead them to other experiences based on their reaction to it.
You and I have both been down this path of some formal wine training, but I think you and I both agree that that's not necessary for the average consumer. How do you get across to your customers that they can explore wine, learn to enjoy wine simply by drinking it?
Right. Yeah. Well, a lot of times we are trying to overcome some preconceived concepts that they may have. They may say that they only like sweet wine, and then we talk about where do you pick up sense the sweetness in your mouth, and you pick it up on the tip of your tongue. And so I would show them a wine that was sweet, and then I would move them to something that's a little more dry and see what their reactions are. So it doesn't have to be sophisticated. You just talk in terms that the customer uses. They tell us what they like and they don't like, and we're able to move them into an area that they do.
Wow. Keith and I were talking before the break about the aging wine market. Does your establishment tend to attract a younger audience? I mean, we are in a college town, so maybe.
We have a great mix of clients here. They'll come in. A lot of the college seniors will come in, celebrating graduation. They'll be on their way to a sorority social, but one of our neatest experiences has been seeing the college seniors bring in their parents for Parents Weekend. They're excited about it, and they want to share their experience with their parents.
That's great. So you're constantly bringing in new selections, tasting new wines. Do you have an overarching concept behind the wines that you serve here?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that, Keith. What we like to do, at least our current model, is we want to stick with varietals, meaning a single grape in a wine, so that people can come in and they can tell me, oh, I really like a Cabernet Sauvignon, and then I can introduce them to, say, a Cabernet Franc. And I could explain to them that they're going to be similar in nature, but the Cab Franc is actually the parent to Cab Sauv, so they're going to be like in some ways and different in others, and that I point out that they could pick up the black pepper finish on the Cab Franc, and I usually get a raised eyebrow at that, and they're like, I might like that.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Todd, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode as we're kicking off season 2. And thank you for hosting us for today's episode and the next couple. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlotte and Keith. Enjoyed having y'all in.
We're going to take another short break. We'll be back in a few moments with my co-host Keith to wrap up today's conversation. Okay, we're back for our final segment of today's first episode. Keith, please explain for our listeners what they can expect during our final segment in future episodes.
Thanks, Charlotte. In season 1, we got a lot of positive feedback from our listeners when we talked about pairing wine with food. So in season 2, we're going to call the final segment of each episode the pairing period. And we'll expand on the cheeses and foods that would pair well with the wine we're drinking that day.
Just when you thought it couldn't get any better, folks, our listeners really weren't wrong. I enjoyed that aspect of season 1 too. I think one of the big reasons we drink wine is to complement our food, so I'm really looking forward to digging deeper into food and wine pairings this season.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to talking you through some great cheese and wine combos, and then we'll talk about the actual dishes that would go along with that wine in a little more detail than we did in season 1.
And that means we'll be eating. Well, that's it for our first episode, though. In season 2 of our Summer Fun Project, if you're just now finding us, you can listen to all 12 episodes of season 1 wherever you find your podcasts. But join us next week when Keith takes us to the Old World for a refreshing white wine, a Greek Assyrtiko. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks to everybody for listening and looking forward to you joining us all season long.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @WinesWeDrink and on Instagram @TheWinesWeDrink. Cheers.